Hello everyone, today we are going to see some important concepts from the topic toxicology. The first one is types of exposures based on duration of exposure. So that there are two major types based on exposure. First one is acute exposure, another is repeated or chronic exposure. So what is acute exposure? When a toxicant is in contact with the animal or organism for less than 24 hours, then we can call it as acute exposure or short term exposure. The toxicant and the organism have contact for less than 24 hours. Repeated exposure. Now this repeated exposure is divided into three minor categories, that is subacute exposure, subchronic exposure and chronic exposure. Now what is subacute exposure? It is repeated exposure, but it is repeated up to 30 days. Now acute exposure was in hours, the exposure was in hours. Here in subacute exposure it is repeated up to 30 days. For example, if a person working in a mine or any other chemical industry, and he or she is in contact with the toxicant for more than 30 days, we can call it as subacute exposure, which is repeated up to 30 days. Subchronic exposure. Now what is subchronic exposure? It is between 30 to 90 days. The person is in contact with the toxicant for 30 to 90 days. Chronic exposure, it is over 90 days, or continuously the person is in contact with the toxicant, so that we can call it as chronic exposure. It is over 90 days. Now there are another concepts which are related to toxicity, is lethal concentration 50, lethal dose 50, effective concentration 50 and effective dose 50. Okay, so first one we are going to see is lethal dose 50. So lethal dose 50 is a median lethal dose. Now, and this dose is measured in milligrams per gram of a body weight for smaller organisms, and for larger organisms it is expressed as mg per kg of body weight. So lethal dose means the dose at which 50% of the population which is under test, or the dose at which 50% population will die when the toxicant is administered or the medicine is administered. Okay, so lethal डोज 50 एक ऐसा डोज है जिसपे 50% पॉपुलेशन विल डाई आफ्टर इंजेक्टिंग. ओके, so after injecting the dose toxicant. Okay, lethal concentration, it is a concentration of the toxicant which is present in air or environment which is responsible for 50% of the population to die. So lethal dose is the dose administered, and concentration, it is the concentration of a toxicant or a chemical which is present in the environment or water or anywhere. So the concentration of toxicant in air or water that is killing the 50% of the organisms, that is called as lethal concentration. And lethal dose is it is administered, that is why it is dose. Now effective dose 50 and effective concentration 50, these are another two terminologies. Now effective dose 50 means the effective dose 50 means the dose which is showing a therapeutic effect on the 50% of the population. So therapeutic effect means medicinal effect. So it is showing a positive effect on the 50% of the population, and EC50 is the concentration which is showing a positive effect on the 50% of the population. So that is ED50, LC50 and EC50. Thank you so much. Keep watching.